Mike, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Jake. It's great to be here. Good to see you again.
Great to see you too, Mike. And I'm very excited about this conversation and where it might go. I'm going to dive straight in, and I want to understand from your perspective, like why Bitcoin is so exciting. And in particular, we've talked on previous podcasts that people can dig up about your experience as an investor before. Mm-hmm. And in particular, the fund that you helped to grow, and you were looking for small to medium-sized Canadian companies to grow.
Correct.
And you obviously came across Bitcoin. So like, why should people be buying Bitcoin?
Well, geez, that's, such a broad question. How do we even capture that in a 1-hour episode? It's taken guys like me and you thousands of hours to, coalesce all the thoughts we've had about why and what and how.
Yeah, sorry. I've thrown the big questions straight away.
Right away. Yeah. Actually, my view is in the people that I talk to now, it's basically why not Bitcoin? There is so much that is wrong with the world these days, as we all know, and perhaps Bitcoin fixes this and fixes everything. But I just think that, there's many other people much smarter than me that talk about the fact that the money's broken and all of us need to deploy our energies into something that can't be deflated or eroded. And that, of course, I'm speaking of the fiat currencies that are controlled by the governments and their irresponsible spending. And I just feel that Bitcoin is something that we can save our life's work in, and we can feel that there is a future for us by saving in Bitcoin and having the understanding of what it all means and where it's going. And it gives us that ability to have that hope for the future that things are going to get better. And as opposed to feel like you're running on a treadmill that's getting ever faster, I feel that Bitcoin can give you an opportunity to just slow things down and take that sort of long-term approach to life and to everything, and just give you that ability to zoom out, if you will.
And what an experience that it is. Like I'm really starting to feel the effects of that. And
right.
In particular, as the price runs, right?
Yeah. We got teased a bit by the price over 100,000 recently. And, there's all the memes going out there that we were right. And we joke on with our group chat on Bitcoin Mentor that, it looks like we're wrong again this week. But I think the direction is upwards and to the right. And that really is a reflection of the fact that, it just can, store purchasing power as more and more people adopt this great savings technology. That's kind of what I think that it reflects. Not so much the, value is expressed in USD or Canadian dollars or Australian dollars, but just the fact that it can, over the long term, preserve your purchasing power. And I think that's what it does.
And I really like the framing of a savings technology. Somehow the first time I heard that phrase, it made me look at it slightly differently. Like, hang on, what is that? So, and you've also mentioned saving your life's work. Mm-hmm. So just dig into for a moment, like what that means.
Well, I think that, we all talk about the fact that Bitcoin is scarce, 21 million, that's all there will ever be. But what's even more scarce than that is the time that we all have here on this planet. And if we're going to invest time into something, that is time that we're sacrificing for something else. So if we are going to deploy that life's work or time work or whatever you want to call it into something that you feel is of value, then what you get paid for that should correspondingly also reflect a long-term value metric, if you will. And life's work is, I'm 54 next week, and time goes by fast. And if I can save in something that is going to, outlast the work that I've done by continuing to appreciate in value of purchasing power, that makes me feel pretty damn good.
It's awesome, isn't it? For example, I spoke at the brilliantly named Cheat Code. So Pete McCormack and Danny's event that they run. And I know that from the stories I've heard, I believe they chose that name because it catches your attention. Like, what is the cheat code?
Right.
And the idea is that Bitcoin is the cheat code. But to actually flip that on its head, as the MC of the event, I heard Max Hillebrand make a great point. It's like, really, the cheat code is fiat and Bitcoin's just normal. That is a
Okay.
sound money
Well,
from an Austrian
yeah,
economics perspective. And the fact that someone's been able to slowly but surely steal your time
right.
for, the modern incarnation of central banking that's called it 100 years old, that was a cheat code for the group that figured that out and have been doing it ever since.
Yeah,
So
and they've certainly
it's
cheated.
just such a big change, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. The other thing that I think is worth noting is, a lot of people that we talk to in our day-to-day encounters with, normies or just regular people in the world, everyone is focusing on securing their life one way or another, whether it's gaining some time freedom or some financial freedom or health freedom or whatever it is, and building a legacy. And often people talk about legacy wealth. The legacy wealth that I really think about is the family that I've built with my wife. We have 3 kids. When they have their own kids, that's really the legacy that I'm leaving. And if I can match that up with some Bitcoin wealth that have saved my life's work in, that just makes me feel multiples better about the future. And that's kind of what I've tried to focus on for my legacy.
Awesome. And it's legacy is a very powerful word in some ways. I just finished a book called Family Wealth by a guy called James E. Hughes, and he's a US-based solicitor. And it was introduced to me by Jason Parks, who
I'm just looking at my shelf to see if I have it. Yeah,
well, you may have done.
Yeah.
Basically exactly what you just described. The intellectual are the most important from a 20, 50, and 100-year time horizon when it comes to family wealth.
Right.
I.e., if you're not having more kids, you don't have humanistic capital.
Right.
So you need that. And then equally, what those people know is the core IP of maintaining the family wealth. And he is studying essentially how to avoid the common proverb of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations.
Yeah.
And so you've actually brilliantly described, well, the main thing is figuring out that I've got a wife and I've got some kids and I need to raise them in a way that I deem suitable, and then help tee them up for their crack at the same job.
If you share
how
your
do you
knowledge.
think about that? Yes.
Well,
yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of just trying to, share the mistakes that I've made and the wisdom that I feel that I've gained with my kids. And of course I hear, "Oh, Dad," a lot, when I try and talk to them about things or, and they are as open as you're willing to be as well to listen. So, I mean, if I want to be known as a father that encourages independent thinking, then I actually have to be open to hearing their counter arguments to my points. But I think that it really just comes down to talking to your family about things that are not just easy. Like sometimes you got to talk about things that are tough, lessons that we've learned, the tough times that my wife and I have had over the years getting to where we are today. Of course, as adult children, they see the life we have now. They don't, and then they see the life that they're living now and all the challenges they're encountering. They don't see their parents as, what we were like when we were young adults and going through those things and what we learned from that. So we just try and share a bunch of stories of our life and what we challenges we encountered and how we navigated them, and just try and break it down into pieces of wisdom that we can share. And, I think that if you treat them with respect, then maybe they will listen. But we do have a framework of things that we want to cover off with our kids to help them prepare for their own life. Because I think that in this day and age, it is getting tougher and tougher with, as you outlined, the cheat code that others are playing on us. And by using things like Bitcoin, I think we can sort of, reverse that tackle if you want to think of it that way, and make up some ground. And so by sharing sort of the learnings that we've had, the wisdom that we've gained with our kids, and try to help them understand in advance what we know, then I think they'll be in a pretty good spot. I got a bit of a funny story for you. So
please.
My 2 daughters are 22 and 20, and they're very good friends. And they were on New Year's Eve heading up to ski in the mountains with their boyfriends. They're all friends. And my younger daughter's boyfriend was driving, pulled out of the driveway and said, "Hey guys, do you want to listen to a podcast as we go up?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure. Why not?" So as they're backing out of the driveway, he starts the podcast, and I think it was of me and you actually.
No
and
way.
they listened to our podcast on the way up.
No way.
Talking about Bitcoin and
Cool.
all that kind of stuff. So I feel like I'm winning because my girls are paying attention to Bitcoin. They're learning and they're sharing that with their boyfriend. So to me, that's a big win.
That's
so obviously I
absolutely
might be
epic.
doing something right.
Oh, Mike, how cool. When you make this content, you actually have no idea where it goes. Like in some ways you can see the data, you can see which countries and you can see how many listens and all this kind of thing, but you don't really know whose ears it ends up in.
No,
so when
for
I
sure.
hear stories like that, it's so inspiring to carry on because you're like,
Yeah.
actually, it's stuff I find interesting already, and that's why I'm doing it. But then the fact that other people find it interesting to spend their time listening as well, I mean, that's incredibly powerful.
Well, how about listening to the old man? That made me laugh too.
And you're making me laugh too because
Yeah.
I've got two daughters and they're like 4 and 2, so you're basically
Yeah.
20 years ahead. And,
Yeah.
and here's a question for you, Mike. So I can really try and learn from this. I think I love the idea of independent thinking, but at what point as a parent is independent thinking? Shut up. These are my rules. Deal with it. And at what point? And you mentioned mistakes as well.
Mhm.
Like no doubt, some of the most important things that happened to me were the hardest times I went through. And I'm 36 now, and I've got 60 years to go.
Right.
So how much rope do you give them? How much do you not? And obviously it's a balancing act. So what's come up for you over the years that helps?
I think you have to let your kids make mistakes. Otherwise they won't learn. And you also have to show trust in them. So once you do that and let them make mistakes, have trust in them, and then they screw up, then they understand the consequences. So I think inherently by just being a parent, they understand, you live in my house. They are our rules at the end of the day. Try and good judgment, make some mistakes, and you'll find out if that mistake was sort of outside the boundaries or not. So I don't know. I've never been an iron fist dad necessarily, but I mean, it's you learn as you go. I think that's kind of the way to do it.
It's making me smirk because essentially it's trial and error. And some days I can go through a bath and bedtime session and I'm like, cool as a cucumber. And then some days I've like screamed and smashed a door.
Oh yeah. Like, don't get me wrong. Of course, I'm at a totally different place than you. My kids are, 16 and in their 20s.
Like, don't trigger me anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. I lose my cool. Of course. I'm only human. Yeah. So you got to every once in a while. So they do remember that, oh yeah, maybe I should pay attention here. Yeah.
It's so cool though, because it's something that I really want this podcast to try and explore. Is there's a lot of merit in what I've learned as an investor that actually can be mirrored onto other parts of my life. And basically every decision you make is a form of investment, and how you allocate your time is a form of investment. And you can kind of use some of the same metrics, like, well, what was the ROI on that choice? And sometimes it's really bad. And it can be as simple as like, I drank 2 bottles of wine and I was fuck for 2 days, It can be as simple as that. Or equally, like, we moved to a place that was wrong, or we bought a house that was at the wrong time, or we should have learned that landlord was going to be bad because of whatever at the start. And so it's really cool how decision making evolves out of that. So when you're building a fund, for example, and you're trying to make decisions on which is a good company to look at and which isn't, like, how much of that is a quantitative process and how much of it's actually more of a qualitative thing?
Well, I mean, maybe it's even first worth even talking about the word you're using, decision. I mean, really what that means is cutting off all other options, right? That's what decision means. So in order to be a good investor, you have to be willing to make decisions, because you can't straddle the fence and without making decisions as an investor or in life, because you won't make any progress. So first of all, I think that's an important element, is you have to be willing to make a decision, stand by it, live with the outcome, and then course correct after the fact if you can. Now, the disadvantage that we had and often you do have in private equity, is you're making long-term investments. We bought decade-long old businesses that were cash flow positive that takes, up to a year to complete a transaction. You make a bad decision, you can't undo that decision the next day. Like, you live with it. So you have to really go through that process of making sure that your decision-making process is appropriate and considers all of the elements. So, when we built our investment platform, we focused as much as we could on quantitative factors that took a lot of the emotion out of it. because,
Yeah, awesome.
emotional decision making is a tougher one. But at the end of the day, these are people businesses. So you have to marry that with also making sure that you're buying businesses from people that you want to spend time with and get to know and work with over the coming decade, because that's the length of the decision making process. You can't separate one from the other. They have to sort of work well together. And I don't know if that answers your question, but
Well, no,
it's
it's
you
a
got to be
really cool
disciplined.
thing,
Yeah.
because I've said in the past that, like, as an investor, you get paid for your decision making,
Mhm.
essentially,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, I think
being
actually in life you get paid for your decision making, because your life
true.
is reflective of the culmination of all the decisions you've made up to this point.
Okay, and so with that, then, Mike, can you share any more about your decision making framework? Is there a philosophy that you apply to lifestyle questions or financial questions, or how do you approach it?
Well, I think sometimes you learn things as you go and you don't even realize what you're using for your framework until you learn something from someone else. And I think that,
Mm,
even the Bitcoin community has helped with crystallizing a lot of the thought process that comes into investment decision making for the long term. And that is having a really long term outlook, low time preference. So whether it's your health, as you joke about drinking 2 bottles of wine, you can do that on a Friday night, but I don't think you want to do it every night, because that would, that would
or
impact
every
your,
Friday.
yeah, or maybe even every Friday. So I think that there's an element of what are the impacts of this decision on the long term for my life, my financial outcomes, my family, all of these things, my ability to spend my time, all of these things. In order to make a decision, you can't just think of what the consequences are tomorrow. It's not just Mike's problem. It's got to be 10 years later Mike's problem. So to
Mm,
look at it that way, I think is helpful. And I think that's kind of why I'm seeing, even on the latest adoption of Bitcoin, it seems to be resonating with a lot of entrepreneurs, because I think when you're an entrepreneur, typically there's no safety net, right? When you make a decision to go at something and do it, you're basically relying on your ability to work hard, your willingness to,
be wrong.
um, think differently, do wrong, and your ability also to deliver value. And other than that, you've got nothing. So, you kind of have to be willing to do that, no safety net. And you also have to realize that these things don't manifest themselves. You don't start a business on Monday and you're rich on Friday. It takes a long time. And that's kind of why I think it works with Bitcoin as well. That is not despite what many people want to think, Bitcoin is not a get rich quick scheme. I think it's a, don't get poor slowly, and probably get rich, over the long term program. And if you're saving in Bitcoin, you will definitely, I believe, preserve your purchasing power and net wealth, but also probably grow it as well. So I think they kind of go hand in hand. Building a business and building a position in Bitcoin, they often work well together.
I love that idea of, like, you don't necessarily have a framework in place, but you're being driven by something, and you've realized later, oh, that's kind of why I chose to do that. And there's
Yeah,
that great phrase that, like, action leads to clarity. Just
right.
try, and
Hmm.
something will happen, right or wrong. It'll help you figure out what the right way actually is.
Yeah.
Mike, would you be willing to share then like, just to try and bring that to life, the idea of entrepreneurs being drawn to Bitcoin? Because I completely agree, by the way, like the idea
Yeah.
of building on a solid foundation. Like, wow, why would you bother with anything else the day that you realize that you can do it like this? So is there any specific business models or products or services that you've seen recently that, come to mind when you mention that?
Not really. I mean, I've always kind of been of the view that if you work hard and deliver value and are committed to what you're going to do, you probably can do it better than other people. And if you're focused on it, you can probably create a business that generates value and delivers value in the marketplace and grows its value over the long term. But what I would say is if you build a business like that and you do generate, excess cash flows, there's a bigger opportunity, and to deploy those cash flows in savings in Bitcoin, then you probably have dynamite at your fingertips, because you've got a cash flowing business that is going to continue to support your lifestyle, plus you've got that savings technology in place that inherently will probably grow faster or as fast as the business that you're building. So business
really
models
cool.
themselves, there's different ones that anyone can deploy. I mean, obviously in our old business, we loved network businesses, smaller obviously than the big ones out there, but we were investors in franchisors. That was a big one.
Okay.
We invested in distribution businesses, so they had network of recurring revenue from customers, et cetera. So I mean, any business can be good. It's just depending on making sure you think of the three key elements: the sales, the operations, and then the finance and accounting.
Cool. Lots resonates. I think to bring this to life in some ways, it's a great opportunity for me just to say to you personally, thank you for the opportunity for me and Bitcoin Mentor last year. And specifically, you got me podcasting again. So you
Right.
contacted me
Yeah.
roughly 12 months ago,
Yeah.
and I was out in the weeds. And what came out of that was the Bitcoin Mentor podcast that we referenced already. And although things didn't quite work out as we hoped in terms of Bitcoin Mentor Australia setup, it was, thank you very much. I learned so much. And even though it didn't quite work out as we hoped, I still gained from it. And from that kind of entrepreneurial perspective, I was able to take a step back. What did I love doing? Well, I loved the podcasting.
Right.
And I have a Bitcoin base case. It's like Bitcoin's going to do its thing. So what I choose to do with my time, perhaps I should focus on creating some kind of cash flowing asset.
Right.
And I really love podcasting. So I've set up a small business. I'm not yet focused on any sponsorship or customers, etc. It's just a case of let's get some high quality content out there, build a Nostr account, build a YouTube account, build a whatever, and the company will own those things. And then what you choose to do with them later down the line can be discovered or figured out. But it's from a more secure base of like, okay, well, I've got Bitcoin behind me. Maybe I can take this risk, or maybe I can take that risk. I think that's perhaps quite a good example of maybe what you're referring to. It's like, as an entrepreneur,
well, that's a
you're
big
building
advantage.
on something.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big advantage you have of already having Bitcoin in place. What I was saying before about not having a safety net is often entrepreneurs don't even have
they
that
just go
basis,
for it anyway.
right? So they're going for it anyway. But yeah, you're at a big advantage, and that's more of an example too of instead of focusing on necessarily what's the right business model for me to get into and then going to do it, you're doing it from, hey, what do I really want to do? What am I good at? How can I differentiate myself? What can I deliver to the marketplace that may have some value? And if I work hard enough at it and stay consistent and keep doing this over and over again, perhaps that'll create a business of value. And I think that's the important step to take. But yeah, you're at an advantage for sure to have that base of Bitcoin. And then you got to throw your excess profits into more Bitcoin.
Well, and that's hopefully what will happen.
Yeah.
I'm touch wood. Come on, let's do this.
Yeah.
One thing then I'd like to go to, Mike, is you're building Bitcoin Mentor. Getting to know you over the last year, you had been, by all accounts, pretty much retired.
Right.
And you're like building a new business. Why?
Well, I think I mentioned at the outset, you've kind of got these different elements of wealth, right? I mean, you've got, financial wealth, and perhaps if you think of your own, your physical well-being, that's some level of wealth. And then you've got time too, which I think is a big factor. And fortunately, I was in the position where, I was fundamentally retired because I've made some good decisions in the past and been the beneficiary of some of those decisions. But I had a lot of time, and I had found Bitcoin and was spending, all my waking hours in it. And I think I mentioned to you before, it can be kind of lonely to do that, doing the Bitcoin thing on your own all the time, listening to podcasts, reading books, all that kind of stuff. We also need some level of social interaction. And I think whether it's you and I on the podcast today, or me spending time on the calls with new potential proteges for discovery calls, or our team on our weekly calls, there's that social element where you're sharing what you know and you're finding out and you're learning more. And I find it just energizing. So I could probably just sit around and do nothing, but man, that doesn't seem like wealth to me, sitting around doing nothing and not making yourself better and improving your intellectual capacity. I think for me, not unlike you with podcasting, for me, I love talking to people about things and sharing ideas and learning from them. And that's kind of why I'm doing Bitcoin Mentor, is to, help onboard the next wave of Bitcoiners, make sure they don't make the same mistakes that I've made, and kind of get them on the right path. Because I mean, I think that, as we opened up the show, why not Bitcoin? I feel that once you learn about it, you kind of want to share it. And for those that are willing to hear about it, I'm here. I'm here to talk about it and share with you some lessons and hand you off to some great mentors that can help you with your setup. So yeah, I'm just kind of energized by it. I feel, more engaged in this business than I have in a long time, just because I'm doing something that's super fun.
We've covered this before, but I think there'll be some new listeners to this particular podcast. The word mentor, like, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, we view it as mentor. We can throw that word around a lot, and it is often thrown around a lot. I view it as someone who takes someone under their care. I'm making sure that your outcomes benefit from what I know and what I can share with you, and share with you the wisdom of what we've gained. And again, as I've mentioned with my kids, try and give you that perspective so you can learn from the mistakes that we've made or the wisdom we've gained, and treat you with care and respect to get you to the goals that you want to achieve. So it's kind of a care or love based approach to making sure that people have a positive outcome with Bitcoin. That's kind of the way we look at it.
Cool. It strikes me as a much more kind of symbiotic relationship, which is really cool, because it's really hard to figure out Bitcoin. And the cool part of
I'm
that
still
is,
figuring it out.
So, and same here.
Yeah.
The cool part is it's very hard to see, but it's very hard to unsee.
Yeah.
So once you get it, or you start to get it, you're like, shit, I must find out more about this. And I couldn't encourage anyone more, reach out to Bitcoin Mentor, get in touch. I was able to refer someone to Dale recently, which I think has gone well from all that I know. And it's just awesome that there is now this product in place where people can get very, very high quality information at the click of a button, essentially. But from someone that they, has been, please, I'll let you go.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think that where we help people is, and I think as you're touching on, once you learn about Bitcoin, I haven't met too many people that have been sort of orange pilled, if you will, go down the rabbit hole, get into Bitcoin, and then they decide, nah, it's not for me. Yeah. So we're basically trying to accelerate that process by getting them further, down on that continuum. And there is, Jake, a ton of noise out there, right? I mean, there is
absolutely,
social media.
Well, the whole shitcoin market to start.
The whole shitcoin market and different apps and different wallets and all this kind of stuff. So we're trying to stay a little bit, not on the bleeding edge, but be well aware of what the best solutions are for people and expose them to solutions that they may not otherwise find themselves, nor would they be sort of comfortable setting up. And we kind of get them through that process by, as I say, mentoring them, guiding them through that process, and ensuring they get to the outcome they want. And, the good thing is our mentors really enjoy that process, and it's energizing for them as well. So when you say it's symbiotic, I totally agree, because in order to have a good mentor protege relationship, you have to have a protege that wants to, help themselves. And you basically have the mentor that is facilitating that process, and they have to work together. You can't force it, right? You can't make someone do something. It has to be facilitated by the protege mentor relationship. And I think it works well.
Yeah. And best of luck building that. Here we are on this call now, and just great vibes with everyone that I've met through the Bitcoin Mentor process. And I think the team is truly top quality. So well done on all the progress.
We have some great people. So yeah,
absolutely.
It's been awesome.
And so, Mike, where I'd like to steer next is a question that this is very much in the financial capital space, if I think about those three buckets. But like, Bitcoin is a not get poor slowly scheme. I think I agree with you on that front.
Yeah.
Yes, sometimes the returns look unbelievable. But I'm sure I saw a James Lavish bit of research recently that clearly shows that, like, there's roughly 9 days a year when most of the gains in the market are made. And so if you're out of the market for that particular period, you missed it.
Right.
So basically, it's fucking boring.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
300 and
Yeah.
however many days, you just got
Right.
to sit there and do
Yeah.
nothing. And that's cool, but it's like my attention wanders. And I love this idea of like venture capital investing, for example. And
Mhm.
so it's like, okay, what if the new risk-free rate is not a government bond paying a few percent, but actually it's sitting in Bitcoin self-custody? What can you do to beat that hurdle rate? And do you even bother trying? And I'd love to know, like, from your perspective, how do you think through that?
Um, well, I suppose it depends on what stage of your life you're at. And I think this really depends on whether you're in the wealth building stage of your life where you're trying to, grow your capital, or if you're in the wealth preservation stage where you've got capital that you want to make sure that doesn't erode away. It would be different for everyone. I think that, to your point about, Bitcoin as the new hurdle rate, I kind of tend to agree. I think that it is. I mean, no matter who I'm talking to, whether it's my daughters or my son who's 16, I'm basically saying any excess capital you have right now, no matter what your long-term goals are, deploy it into Bitcoin first and foremost. Any excess. So I mean, I think that's, as you said too, to have that base is fantastic. Then on the point of trying to beat the hurdle rate, and I think I would probably go back to my analogy of, if you're going to invest in yourself, that's probably the best way to do it. Not that being an entrepreneur is for everyone, but if you have the potential to go and start and build a business, my guess is certainly in the early years, while you're building that business, if it's successful, that growth rate will probably exceed Bitcoin's hurdle rate. So,
Mm,
if you go from zero to a million in revenue in a business over 3 years, that's a hell of a good growth rate. And then you stabilize and build that business a little bit more slowly over time, but invest those profits into Bitcoin to strengthen your balance sheet and your overall financial picture. I would say that's a hell of a good bet, on
mm.
yourself and on Bitcoin. And I think that may be a way to have lightning in a bottle in a way.
That's a great point. So, and again, just to share about my own decision making, I struggle to see the benefits at this stage of putting money into a venture fund, for example. So someone might want 250 grand US to invest in their fund. It's like, okay, well, what are you going to go and buy? Well, there's like 4 or 5 funds operating in a space that I think are interesting, and they're often co-investing in deals. So there's not really a huge amount of point putting money in all 3 funds or all 4 funds
Right.
if you had that capital.
Yeah.
But then it's like, what's the actual return profile on this? It's like, well, okay, it's all going to be highly illiquid early stage equity that you may or may not get back for an unknown time horizon. And it's suddenly like, this is hugely risky.
Right.
And it's like, okay, you could take that 250 grand and plow it into your own thing, not
Hmm.
have a shareholder except for yourself, and try and hit $1 million worth of revenue. And there's, at least a couple of X on your investment. And so that actually that resonates very, very strongly. And so where does that leave the venture fund? Is there money out there that still wants to take that kind of bet? And equally, I said this yesterday with Lewis, shout out to Lewis from Mimesis Capital, Lewis Liu. What if Bitcoin's just like Ferrari and it's parked in the driveway, but there's no roads? The infrastructure just doesn't exist yet, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You got to go build it. And who's going to build it? It's going to be companies. And someone's
Hmm.
got to take a risk.
Right.
And it can't just be a bunch of solo entrepreneurs backing themselves, because they won't do it far. Well, maybe they could. I don't know. Yeah, just help me think through that. How might that future world look?
Are you talking about like venture
Well,
funds that are investing in
yes.
Bitcoin
So,
only companies? Like, for
yes,
me,
in that.
that is, much needed in the space. And we're talking to lots of these companies, on a regular basis,
I'm
because they're
sure.
they're developing a lot of these great solutions that, they have to figure out a way to get in the hands of users. And that's kind of where we fit in. So we're actually working with individuals on a day-to-day basis, helping onboard people, getting them into Bitcoin. And so we're an awesome channel for those companies to get their products in the hands of users. Because and to use your analogy of the Ferrari with no infrastructure, I think all of us will probably have a view that one way or another, Bitcoin will continue to grow in purchasing power value over the long term, but it will be probably accelerated even more if there's more ways to use your Bitcoin. Because I'm sure you've encountered people on a regular basis that say, yeah, that's all well and good. Bitcoin's great, but what can I buy with it? 10 years time, if you actually can transact, and buy a house or a second house or get a really well structured loan against your Bitcoin that isn't marked to market every minute, those kind of things will be hugely powerful for the value of Bitcoin to be deployed as an asset that can be utilized as opposed to just stored. So yeah, I mean, I'm super hopeful that kind of stuff happens. So in that sense, investing in venture funds that are Bitcoin focused, that have sort of that need to deploy capital to grow that infrastructure is valuable. And I myself also am interested in investing in those types of opportunities. Now, the flip side is the conventional sort of fiat-minded venture funds that are just focused on growing revenue, not profitability. That's, in my opinion, much less sustainable, because in a world where the money is real, you can't have those businesses anymore that basically just only grow. They're basically early stage zombie companies, and they're only growing by virtue of the fact that they can raise capital and then they go public, and that's kind of the way it is. So I think that for businesses to be sustainable over the long term, they have to be cash flow or Bitcoin flow positive. And I mean that those that do deliver true value will actually stay in the market for the long term.
And so do you think that the equity in those businesses has the ability to outpace Bitcoin?
Probably, certainly in the early
Yeah.
years. Yeah, as you go up that. I mean, any new business, right? You've got a bit of a J curve, right? You're not profitable for the first part. You got to invest in the business so you grow it. But as you come out of that J curve, and if that J curve is steep and your growth is rapid, and you're realizing value in a rapid pace, as you come out of that J curve, that value growth is going to be pretty phenomenal. Now, that may not stay that way for 20 years, but certainly in the front end, I think that growth profile will exceed Bitcoin's growth rate.
Really cool. And so if you were to operate in this early stage equity space, that's what you're looking for essentially, is something with a bit of product market fit that has got a core team that you really like and has a decent market to go after. It doesn't look like it could be regulatory kind of hampered in some sense. And you try and buy equity just as it kicks off and needs the extra capital. And I mean, I guess the liquidity moment is harder to see in a sense, because why would you IPO if you're super profitable? I don't know, but it's really, really cool to think through.
It's a bit of a paradigm shift, I think. I mean, most often companies IPO because they want access to further capital markets, right? They want more capital to have access to. Whereas that's kind of conventionally the why businesses stay private, is because they're cash flow positive. They're generating a positive return profile for their owner or owners, and they don't need access to more capital because they've got either the cash flow is strengthening their balance sheet generally, and they have opportunities to pursue with the excess cash flow within their business, or they can, borrow at a relatively low cost to take on new projects. So typically, I mean, access to capital is, required for those businesses that have that potential. They haven't hit the cash flow mark yet.
So maybe then there's a space for kind of early stage equity investors that are coming in early enough to get those higher risk bets off the ground. But then there'll be some kind of like private equity growth type phase where businesses aren't taking as much risk. They've done more growth. They don't necessarily need the public scrutiny of public markets, and therefore they can go and mate, that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, because it's Bitcoin just changes everything. Like, in terms of like how the balance sheet looks. Like the growth curve is actually like productivity down. It's been really screwing with my head recently, where you start looking at a business, you're like, hang on, sorry. So because it's priced in Bitcoin, which is getting more valuable, the good sign is actually coming down. Like, whoa.
Yeah. The other thing that's will still be needed is, for a new business to start up, they still do need, that equity risk capital, that first loss capital, even if they're a Bitcoin company. We see great businesses that have a great idea that it just by virtue of the market won't last, right? I mean, even in the venture space, in the Bitcoin only world, there's still going to be companies that fail, even if you think they've got the best management team and a great product. Not all of them will succeed, so there still will be risk there for sure. So if you can pick only the winners, man,
you'd obviously approach it with that attitude. It's like, yeah, we're going to be really, really, really good at choosing the right companies.
Yeah.
But equally, you're not going to get it right every single time.
No.
That's okay. As long as you've got in early enough, and therefore the equity upside for each investment has enough potential to pay off the ones that don't work.
Mm-hmm.
What I think...
But it's back to your point before about decision, right? So you're basically, if you are deploying your Bitcoin into those investments, you've made a decision that you're not using that Bitcoin for other things.
For something else,
that really becomes the decision that you have to make. Am I going to put my money into these venture funds with the expectation that I'm not going to see the return for 10 years? Am I okay with that?
Yeah, to iterate that one further, I think what I'm digging around for here is justification for doing that. And so I'm looking for a pitch in a way that's like, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because if Bitcoin's just going to crunch away over the next decade doing its thing, I'm actually up for taking more risk because that's my risk-free return, and it's going to do very nicely. Thank you very much. And so 1%, 2%, 5%, however much you might want to make it as a portfolio allocation, you go, well, hell yeah, let's take some risk. The question might then be, is it the right timing? Do you do it now, or do you do it in 2 years' time or 4 years' time? Because I think a lot of it's really luck. Or in some ways, maybe you just have to DCA into early stage equity over the next 10 years and just see what happens.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The other thing is too, I mean, it would be really great if you could find a investment fund, and I think there has been some talk about it, that is denominated in Bitcoin. So let's say, for example, instead of expressing your investment at 250,000 US dollars, it's, you invest 2 Bitcoin, and that's kind of your cost basis for your return profile. And at the end, it's not based on fiat currency, it's based on 2 Bitcoin. So that's your baseline. Your hurdle rate is based on that Bitcoin that you would get out, and that's your cost basis, not the US dollars. So that would be a better program as well.
If one was a limited partner in a fund like that, that's a much easier sell. You give me 2 Bitcoin, you'll potentially get 2 Bitcoin back plus whatever the carry is.
Yeah.
And equally as the GP doing that, well, if you're heavily into Bitcoin, that's the hurdle rate already. So why would you even bother doing any of this unless you think you can beat it?
Right.
And so that perhaps is how it should work. Mike, so as we peel apart this, like there's obviously many, many layers to, a complete innovation in money and the shift from soft money to hard money, or whatever you want to describe that as. The very start of the conversation, you touched on, what was it? Life's work. And so here we are, like moving into a sound money era, and one's life work is easier to save. But perhaps we could just draw a comparison, like when you were previously building businesses, investing, what were some of the problems that you had trying to save your life's work? And how does this future you're building make it easier?
Well, yeah, I mean, problems. I just had problems keeping my head above water. I was a young man who had, no material savings, had no sustainable job, had tried several entrepreneurial ventures, had a wife that was extremely patient and supportive, but was basically, saying, okay, this has to work. And that was kind of the situation I found myself in. And fortunately it did. So I wasn't necessarily thinking, Jake, about how to preserve my life's work. I think at that time I was just thinking, how am I going to create some value that's actually going to translate into long-term security by realizing a win at the end of the day and by building something of value. And I think that's kind of the way I was thinking of it. Because I was not a great employee. I was a better, entrepreneur, I think. And so I was always trying to figure out ways to deliver value to the marketplace and find out what that niche was. So, it just so happened that it was in, small to medium-sized businesses, cash flowing businesses. I had expertise in doing deals and valuing businesses. And working with business owners and selling the story, if you will. And that was kind of my expertise. So I don't know if I was even as philosophical to think, what can I save my life's work in? I think that's just come to me now through the Bitcoin journey, to recognize that I have life's work that has created some value and some capital, and I don't want that to erode. And what can I put that into now? And then I'm trying to share that with the people that are in my life to say, think of it in advance. So I did not have the benefit of that type of philosophical thinking when I was a young man by any stretch.
When you tell me that story, I love it's basically a constant process of iteration, isn't it? Like we're just trying, we're hustling. And then it's like, in hindsight, you're like, oh, well, obviously I want to save my life's work.
Yeah.
Like no one's thinking like that.
No.
Absolutely not.
No. Well, maybe some people are. I just wasn't. Yeah.
Well, I mean, because of the nature of losing my father when I did and inheriting money in my 20s, I was given that problem to solve.
Right. Yes.
And so it's not like I was saving my life's work, but my life's work became saving this money I was given. It's like, don't fuck it up, mate.
Yeah. Which is quite common.
Bitcoin.
I think you and I have talked about that before. It's quite common with inherited wealth. You feel this responsibility that you first and foremost don't want to lose what your father worked hard to on his life's work, right? I mean, you have that responsibility to make sure that you preserve that. And then you were fortunate to find Bitcoin at the time you did. That doesn't guarantee, but it puts it in pretty good place that you're in a solid place, right?
Well, and absolutely one of the reasons that I'm out podcasting is because it's made my life, better, like on every front. Less stressed, more time, wealthier on every metric. You're like, wow, well, this thing's doing literally what I thought it was going to do, and it's actually happening. That I think is almost the hardest part, when I have to just touch wood slightly for a second. Like, oh my God, what if you have solved the wealth problem? And sorry, I should rephrase that. What if Bitcoin solves the wealth problem? I just happened to learn about that.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
It's not me. I'm not Satoshi Nakamoto. I can tell you that right now.
No, me neither. Yeah.
Wow. It's so interesting. And so, Mike, okay, beginning of 2025, well, it's mid-Feb already, amazing. But what's got you most excited about the next kind of 12 months?
You mean in the Bitcoin space? I mean, I would be
whatever comes is totally fine.
I mean, I'm really excited with all the things we've got going on with Bitcoin Mentor. I've talked to you about, deploying your work and efforts into something that you feel you can grow. I'm spending most of my time in that, and then I think that the next 12 months are exciting, and if we continue to get great adoption with Bitcoin, then I think we're there to help with that process and facilitate it. I'm kind of emboldened by what we're seeing in the world, that maybe a lot of this nonsense we've lived through over the last several years is starting to dissipate a bit, and where there's a little bit more, sunshine on the horizon. And I think things are looking a little bit more optimistic for those that are freedom minded. And I think that fits well with the Bitcoin community also. Freedom go up is maybe more important than number go up.
Absolutely. And so there'll be people listening that don't necessarily understand what you mean by freedom go up. So what does that mean and feel like to you?
Well, for me, it means that what Bitcoin can provide is the ability to truly own an asset and control it, and with no counterparty risk. So when you take Bitcoin, whether you buy it peer-to-peer or off an exchange, and you take custody of that, whether it's in a setup where you've got your hardware signing devices or whatever, you control that. There's no counterparty risk. There's no one you have to ask permission for to spend that Bitcoin. I can send you a transaction, Jake, without asking for permission from my bank to send you some Bitcoin. And you can likewise do the same. We don't have to ask permission from everyone. So that inherently just gives you the freedom to choose how you're going to transact, who you're going to transact with, and to what extent you're going to do that. And I think that gives people freedom. And there's probably no better expression of freedom than your ability to decide where you're going to deploy, whether it's that capital you've saved or the money you've worked for. And I think that goes hand in hand with Bitcoin. You make those decisions. And as we've talked about through this episode, decisions, cut off all alternatives. And when you deploy your savings into Bitcoin, you have the ability to then decide how you're going to spend it without asking for permission.
Permission is a great word. I talked through this with Dale quite closely. You have to be very careful how you adopt Bitcoin, because there's lots of different variations of Bitcoin. To start at the beginning, you might send your dollars to a crypto exchange and you buy Bitcoin and you just sit on the exchange.
Mm-hmm.
Well, really what you have is a derivative for Bitcoin. And that
You have an
exchange might
IOU.
be correct. It might be
Yep.
trading all these different altcoins, who knows? Then you can move it to self-custody, but there's then single sig versus multi-sig versus a mobile wallet. And this is obviously where Bitcoin Mentor really
Yep.
comes in. So if you want to have a kind of permissionless setup, do you have a specific setup that you'd like to recommend? Or like, how should people think about that? Because not to badmouth anyone, but there are plenty of services out there that are very smart with their marketing that will imply that you're not responsible enough to look after your own Bitcoin, and therefore you need me. And I'm not happy about those. I think that's probably a safe way of saying it.
I don't disparage any other solutions, and nor do you. I know that. And I just kind of think that it is a paradigm shift for people to actually feel as though taking responsibility is a good thing. And most people abdicate that responsibility all through their lives to other counterparties, and having that ability to have a setup that you control, whether or not you feel that you can, we can help you get comfortable with whatever solution we work on with you. So no, I mean, I don't think there's a one best solution other than one that the individual feels comfortable replicating, and understanding what it means, why they're doing it, and how they can make it work. So we have sort of best practices that we follow given different circumstances, and that doesn't mean that my setup is the right one for you or yours is right for one of your friends. But through that process of Socratic dialogue, maybe we can figure out what is the right one for you, or my uncle, or whatever the case may be, and we figure out where their strengths and weaknesses are and comfort levels and all that kind of stuff, and get them through that Bitcoin continuum, if you will, to sort of start them at point A, and maybe 2 years later they're at a point where they've totally got comfort and confidence, and they feel liberated with what they've got, and they're not relying on anyone else. So I think it's just wherever the person's at that they kind of feel good about, that's kind of what we want to help them with.
Yeah, awesome. It's essentially a massive spectrum.
Yep,
and
it is.
There's no solution that's perfect for anyone.
Yeah,
everything is a trade-off, and it's wherever you feel most comfortable that's the best one.
Yeah.
And I always really resonated with the idea that you guys spoke through, was like just meeting people where they're at.
Yeah,
because everyone's at a different stage. But the chances are someone at Bitcoin Mentor is well ahead of where you are, and therefore can be extremely helpful in shortcutting your route there.
Yeah, I want to touch on one thing that you said that I think all of us in the Bitcoin space can relate to, is that it can be boring. Like, you basically are allocating capital to Bitcoin and then just keeping it there for the long term.
And then just shut up.
But so what I find is interesting and important in the Bitcoin journey is you're starting at this point, but as your knowledge and confidence and commitment to Bitcoin increases, so too does your understanding, so too does your competence with your setup. So I think that's where the interesting part comes in. You start at point A with a mobile wallet, and at the end of the day, you've got 2 years later, you've got a setup with one of the new solutions that has miniscript involved, with decaying multi-sig and built-in inheritance planning, and you've done that yourself. And I think that's kind of the exciting part of Bitcoin, without trading it, with just holding it and making sure that what your setup is perfect for you at the time.
It's like basically the Bitcoin rabbit hole is never ending,
Yeah.
and just keep on digging, because it's such a compelling intellectual process. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be trading in and out of an asset to get those kind of bits of feedback.
But if you can, go for it. I just, that's just not my strength.
No, I'm with you there. Mike, awesome to spend an hour together. Thank you so much for your time today. One last thing is, where can people find you if they want to reach out?
You can find our team at bitcoinmentor.io, and you can set up a discovery call with me, and we can walk through some of these questions and figure out what might be the best solution for you.
Awesome.
And thank you, Jake, for having me on. It's a pleasure.
No, my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time today, Mike.
Thanks, Jake.